Right, so just to recap, we're talking about, I suppose, thinking about 2040, what it might look like, what the grid will look like, what the energy and capital flows will look like, etc. And then during the break, we were talking a little bit about this kind of rhetoric that is quite prevalent now around there's that trade-off between sustainability or electrification and cost. So one of the things I think we need to discuss is how do we make electrification, and then once that's done, kind of running electric fleets more cost efficient? And what does that mean in terms of where we need to get to with the grid? What does that mean to when it comes to charging or financial kind of imperfections that we have in the system now? And also, of course, what does it mean in terms of the trucks, the availability of, we've spent a little bit of time talking about the this kind of constraints we have now from a policy and legislation perspective around weights, etc. I think it would be good to get that on the minutes as well, to talk about where does that need to go, what sort of barriers do we need to overcome there. Some of the other notes I have from Jamie and the crew on PREP is around infrastructure bottlenecks, system integration failures. Maybe Michael, you've got some thoughts around digital and how the system needs to integrate. There's a little bit around funding and financing, which we haven't really talked about. And I'm wondering whether that is because it's not fully understood what the opportunities are in that area in terms of drive efficiencies, or whether we think actually the operational efficiencies, the energy efficiencies are so much more important than actually the funding of it. If we get everything else right, is going to come. Do we think there are kind of improvements in that area as well that needs to come? Tim, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I think one thing, if we look at 2040, we'll see residual values coming into the market. By then, the biggest thing we've got at the moment is you've got a truck that is probably 2.5 times the price of a diesel, with virtue written down to zero. So I think we'll see, if we look at ahead, we'll see a second-hand market, a residual, and then a residual value market. And I think that will bring down the efficiencies of the vehicle as well, bring down the cost of the vehicle and the price per month. Because a lot of vehicles, we don't buy a heavy truck a lot of times on HP or from cash. Something like 60-70% are on some sort of contract hire leasing package within a repair and maintenance contract, etc., etc. At the moment, I think buying an electric truck, as in buying, is a big issue. And leasing wise, virtually everything's written down to zero, so there's no IV. And yet the battery, I look at that one at 540 kilowatts, look at some of the other manufacturers, 620 kilowatt, that has a second-hand value. The actual battery itself, all you have to do is go on eBay. Anybody do a thing, look at battery, say batteries, and there's second-hand batteries from cars and from vans. And if you start looking at what a kilowatt, I've got a little spreadsheet, I'm very sad. I start working out the price per kilowatt hour of a second-hand battery, and I start looking at those figures. That cab's got that cab's got a value. Everything on it, you could sell it as the parts on it plus the battery, and you could actually make something of it. But the finance houses, because again it's new, it's not something we've done before, it's an education process, and of course, just like finance, prove you don't need the money and we'll give it you. And therefore it's a case of looking at the fact that they don't want to take the risk because they perceive it as risk. So again, I think education on the finance houses is another group that we need to get to. The manufacturers should back the product up in contract hire packages. I think that's starting, and Andrew, I'm sure you will.
As an ex-OEM, I would say the OEMs are guilty of this because they are deliberately hiding all of their risk by writing them down to zero.
Correct.
Which is madness.
Yeah, and that doesn't help the finance. The finance will say, well, hey, if they don't do it, why should I do it? But it has got that vehicle as a part is worth a fortune, and the battery's worth a fortune, and we can do so much with it. So I think funding and financing is a real barrier to bringing up the trucks, and I think by 2040, I think we'll have got over that.
Tim, just on that, to where we are today though, I'm pretty conscious in the market, I've seen 20% RVs at 5 years, 500,000 miles being offered.
That's because you get more value in the parts because you can't get hold of the parts to fix them when they go wrong.
On trucks, that is, not cars.
I'd say any vehicle at the moment. We have part shortages, we have supply chain challenges, we have resource shortages. My life as a fleet manager is hell. I've got OEMs using me as their test bed because, no offence, but OEMs are throwing vehicles at us because you've got the tech world merging with the vehicle world. And so you've got people who are traditionally built mechanical vehicles and now dealing with digital who don't understand digital. So the problem is always my fault first. As the operator, it's something I've done to that vehicle. They will not own the problem, and yet I'm trying to be collaborative, saying, I'll help you fix it, let's fault find it together, and I'll take another one. So you've got this continuous battle at the moment of new tech. Fleet managers are like too scared to take it. So if we're always talking about some of these barriers and what's happening, why do I want to put all of my money into a really expensive vehicle that then doesn't work, and I have no cash guarantee at the end of it, unless OEMs start to back it up or my lease funders start to back it up, or I've got deep enough pockets myself to suck it up when it goes wrong. Sorry, bit of a sore point.
Sorry. But all of that only really gets unlocked when we increase demand.
Yeah.
An increase of demand actually creates enough circulation of activity in financial transactions so those residual values come up. And actually, I've been talking to some members recently who have seen some decent resale values. They didn't have them as RVs, but they had resale values. And that's, I think, if you say where do we need to get to, unless we can get a big increase in demand by taking away the immediate barriers, all these growing pains are gonna persist. But
unfortunately, you need someone to go first.
Yeah.
And then you need someone as mouthy as me that then goes and prods all the auction houses and says, what are you doing about these vehicles? Because they make a fortune out of my current vehicle, if we go back to vans, because that's where I have a lot. And they're like, it's all right, we make money out of yours. I went, yeah, but next time you come to sell one of mine, it's an electric, and what are you doing about it? Because we haven't moved the second-hand buyers into the space that we are as first-hand. So it's getting through the tiers of purchasing that help bring that through. So it isn't just what do we need to do up front, it's how we take all those stages through. And it's, I'm going to bring up another pet subject of mine as well, which is there aren't enough of me around, and that's fleet managers, people actually doing the doing and getting those wheels, hitting that tarmac and out doing the job. And there's no career path. So we're building apprenticeship schemes at the moment as part of the role I do at AFP and as a sponsor, because nobody's bringing in the kids. And if we automate too much, Michael, with all of our autonomous stuff, then what job are my kids going to do when they come out of school? So there's this whole circular activity in what we need to do and educating people in that. Sorry, another pet subject.
Can I just pick up on 2 points there? Because I think, to your point, there is the demand piece, but it's also the time piece, because I've seen those analyses where residual values, I've been responsible for some of them, unfortunately, but looking at business cases around, how, and you're right, after 5 years, 6 years, 8 years for sure, you got zero, absolutely zero. So, and part of the reason for that is that, one, there's not enough demand for that sort of after, second life piece, because there's not enough batteries out there now in that part, and so there's not enough of a business case to build that. But the other part is that we're not there yet. Most of the trucks that we see now are very new, so no one's had to kind of deal with it. So it's this, again, chicken and egg piece around, we don't know what we're going to know in 5 years' time, and we can't make decisions on the new vehicles now based on what we will know in 5 years' time. That doesn't work. The other piece I'm wondering, we haven't really touched upon this, I know people was somewhere on the agenda, but I've skipped it, is around the changing requirements of the fleet manager. Because again, I've had conversations where I'm trying to encourage them to look at what they need to do around charging. Do you actually need all of these charges that you think that you need? How much electricity do you need? What are the opportunities you have to actually hedge some of that, or not be a price taker, but actually be active in that market? And most of the fleet managers have never had to think about these things before.
And then the other problem is fleet managers, it's always been the dirt on the bottom of a finance director's shoe. You are a cost to
Yeah.
that business.
Yeah.
End of.
Yeah.
So what can you do to maximise it? And therein lies the problems we've always had in logistics. That's why the margin is low. You utilise that vehicle 24/7 because you get the maximum out of it that you can. And it's always been that case. But now the fleet manager is the solution the CEO needs because they haven't figured out how they're going to do a sustainability transition. So everything is coming to the fleet manager. We're now having to, Adam's heard me on a stage preach about this before, we're now having to be the well-being person for the driver because we've got to look after their safety responsibilities. We're still doing all the legislation piece and the legislation is changing faster than we can read the new bit. We won't even go into AER rates over the last couple of weeks. We've then got all of the, is it hydrogen or not? And I've got to learn everything on hydrogen and understand all the differences in that side of it. I need to understand everything to do with biodiesels and which ones are drop-in fuels and which ones aren't, and therefore do I need to change my bunkers or not? Is it sustainable? 6 months later, am I going to change everything in the tank because I haven't got it and it's gone mouldy? I've got to do all of that by managing my cost as well. And I've now got to think about ticking the boxes on Scope 1, Scope 2 and Scope 3 in terms of sustainability reporting. We're doing it all in the fleet team because nobody else understands it's their responsibility to do it as well. And that is the challenge you've got. And the more you move into logistics type of operations, again, they do it all. And there's almost too much now, but no more resource, no more knowledge. And the next thing, the early adopters have taken this, put my first EVs in ages ago, put all my chargers into the car park ages ago. I've now got safety people coming to me saying, you can't have that charger there because it will catch fire. No, it won't. Hasn't done in the last 6 years that I've had it. Why is it going to catch fire now? And I've got a legislation piece coming in on top because people are now panicking because of the e-scooters and the cheaper stuff that's come through. That is myth busting. We need to myth bust more out there and make sure that if we put a piece of legislation in over here, we actually understand what it does to legislation over here and we don't go over the top in what we're doing. I'm going to stop, otherwise I'm going to keep ranting.
I want to come to you guys on that side in terms of the digital and the enablers that we have in that side. Just picking up on one point you made though in terms of the fleet managers and kind of elevating their role. Is there an element of almost like a two-tier market where if you're a logistics or a transport company where the fleet is actually your main means of revenue, so to speak, vis-a-vis companies that use their fleets in order to do whatever their operations are, so they're just the enabler? And does that, the fact that one of those organizations might have more of a focus on how you drive efficiencies, et cetera, is there like a two-tier or not?
I think in my experience, whether people operate their own vehicles or whether they have a third party doing it for them, they all want service and efficiency, and that kind of continuous improvement and desire to be better is deeply within the industry.
It's fundamental, isn't it, in terms of what we're doing from the CI perspective?
Yeah, so, I think it is, mate. Yeah, I do. I don't see that.
So we speak to a lot of businesses and we get a different set of messages. I think the biggest message I would take away is that every business is different and has their own reasons. But we get a couple of consistent themes. One is centrally inside the business, a decision has been made that carbon targets are important, science-based targets are important, and therefore we will electrify our vehicles. And that's often a scenario where they've got control over their own vehicle set. The other one we see is my supply chain has pressured me into changing my vehicles, and therefore I'm changing my vehicles to satisfy my supply chain or win key contracts. They tend to be two of the main reasons we get from the businesses we speak to. What I'm mainly delighted about though is that one of the things that Lorna didn't bring up just now was that charging isn't her number one issue. And when we were talking about price just now, we weren't talking about the cost of delivering charging. But I think now I've said it, I've just thrown myself into the bear trap of recognizing that charging is where this meets the other challenge we talked about, which is the grid. And we've got this dynamic whereby ultimately what we want the charging asset to do is to be a socket, like a plug socket in a house that everyone understands, or a USB port you can plug into. But it's not quite as simple as that yet. Dave presented a vision earlier of a seamless 2040. Keen to get there, but what we need to do, and I'm going to point a few fingers around the room, what we need to do is make sure that we integrate all the data, make sure we got all our standards aligned, because a lot of the standards that we're using for transferring information are not standard, and therefore we've got to be consistent with the way that we communicate with each other, understand all that data, manage all that data, make it as easy as just plugging in. And then the layer that I'm interested in is how do we then put a layer of payment on top of it so all the right people pay for the right things. So we've got this kind of challenge in the charging space, which is we're secondary to everything else. People want to talk about this first because this is cool, this is sexy. And ultimately, the only people who care about charging are the people who are the geeks inside the industry that have to deal with it every day. And every driver who's had a problem cares about charging. When they don't have a problem, they don't care. When they do have a problem, they care an awful lot. And that creates noise, and noise goes back into the fleets. And that's when we get, you know, this doesn't work, that doesn't work. And that's the bit that we need to use our data now to overcome slowly.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. But it's sort of linking to the point about sort of transport management resources and things like that, that it is linked to sort of data and automation, because they're introducing things like manual planning and things like that to cope with charging stops and whatever is going to make transport managers' lives more difficult. And so I think that we do need to sort of, in some respects, kind of de-skill EV adoption, so you don't have to be a sort of super expert sort of specialist like Lorna in order to be able to make it work for your fleet. We need to sort of have access to a set of tools that enable any fleet to sort of do electrification, rather than it being a sort of specialist pursuit as it is at the moment. I would say that in the fleets that we work with, it's, guess to sort of Neil's point, it's not really sort of the people who operate their own vehicles or not. It's more sort of, it's a question of resourcing and margin in order to have sort of time to focus on this, because there are a lot of other things that you have to deal with as a fleet manager, aren't there? And so it's where that this comes in the priority list, and then who has to work through all of the issues that exist and remain.
I suppose we were talking a little bit in the break around sort of getting away from the cost, that it's so costly, and changing that narrative to something where it's progress and costs are coming down, or you could do things to impact. But to what degree is this? Because it's a low margin business, you don't have the resources really to focus on it. To what extent is it actually, there is a lot of data out there, but no one really knows where it is or how to use it. And to what extent is it actually, we're not pushing the efficiencies hard enough, be it on the products, the way that we operate the vehicles, the way that we procure power, etc., etc. So if we had to like rank them or kind of go through where the issues are on each one of those, how would people characterize it?
I don't know, I think we're talking about charging and infrastructure. I'll throw one in here. Okay, MCS. Is it something that we believe in? I mean, from a truck manufacturer's point of view, are they going to put an MCS and a CCS connection together? Are they going to do...
Neil and I are laughing because we were talking in the break about using acronyms and making the assumption that everyone in this room knows exactly what every letter is.
Yeah, so obviously CCS, combined charging system, hopefully, at the moment, that's what we've got. There's the truck manufacturers, I think there's 5 points. I think Renault's got 5 points, something at each corner, and then one at the back as well. You can have an option of where you put your charger. But then we've got megawatt charging coming along, which is bi-directional in theory, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then there's two sides to that. Do we future-proof and put megawatt charging in if we're looking at 2040? Or do we do CCS? Do the manufacturers put in CCS for the heavy trucks MCS for the heavy trucks and CCS for distribution trucks? Do they put two chargers in there? These are things that you've got to think about for the future. And I ask truck manufacturers these sort of questions all the time, but I think it's important that we bring these sort of things up. Megawatt charging, I recently saw, which in theory the charger has to be at a certain point behind the back of the cab and a certain height. I've seen now automated chargers put that. There was in Vegas this year, and basically it's a LiDAR system, and it looks at it, so it can actually automatically charge the vehicle up while you're not there. So these are the sort of advances that we're talking about. How far away we are, I think it's, but I think it's important that we bring these up for looking at what we do by 2040. Are we all going to be on megawatt? Or are we going to still be on CCS? Tell me.
Do we have megawatt in the US? Is it a standard? Because we don't have CCS.
No, I know. Well, you've got your American system. Yeah, exactly, because they've gone completely different. But I think what's the group's view on that one?
I think we've got to be careful not to let perfect be the enemy of the good now. And I think there's a bit of a danger that if we paint this picture too much of that world, that it prohibits progress right now. And I think we already see quite a lot where, you know, customers are thinking about buying some trucks, and they have, you know, spec'd out, you know, some chargers because they think that they're going to need, you know, say 350 kilowatt chargers to charge 3 trucks. And the reality is, you know, we talked about this. You know, for a start, you're never going to be charging those 3 trucks together. Or very, you know, worse, you can certainly stagger, so you don't need to. And in some cases anyway, the trucks can't even take that. So, you know, I think there's a lot of cost going in, and also allocation of network going in at the moment that's not actually required because people don't understand the requirements. So I think there is quite a big piece for me around you can over-spec this, and by just right-sizing it, you can hugely reduce the costs and, you know, remove some of those barriers to getting vehicles out there.
Some you can put a 22 kilowatt on, or an AC 430, but I think these are things that are confusing customers now at the moment. Operators are hearing MCS, they're hearing all these sort of things. I think part of the job for education and communication is to have our ideas ready and have an idea of this roadmap and what we're doing and how we're doing, because then this is the whole point. I think the 12 pillars is saying, okay, then learn this, because this is the messaging that they're getting. And they're thinking, oh gosh, I don't MCS. You know, what am I doing? What are the key messages? What are the manufacturers giving as key messages? All these sort of things are important that are discussed, because again, like we said, it is a roadmap in the end.
I suppose I was going to say, for me, if it was a cost advantage, learning and deploying would be worth it. So it's only a burden when engaging with electrification is costing you more than the alternative. So for me, the key thing is you don't need to worry about anything if we can just reduce cost. And simplistically, the 2 things that really matter in costs, like RVs is important but not the be all and end all, insurance is important but not the be all and end all, service and maintenance is relatively important, I'd say, you know, probably the 3rd most, but really it's just capex and energy price. That's literally all it comes down to.
Roll all 5 of those together and it's a nightmare.
Yeah, but you know, you could move the dial significantly on an RV. It's not going to make a huge difference in your TCO calc. Like, you know, okay, if it was 100%, it would do. But if you move it from 15 to 20 or 10 to 15, the delta's not huge relative to the. Say, if you could get energy from 25 to 15p, you know, it would win hands down every time. It's the most important factor. So realistically, the problem is it's the relative price of diesel to electricity that creates all of the other headwinds, in my opinion.
Actually, the biggest problem for the fleet operators, and I'm going to throw the word in, solid state batteries. What we've got as fleet operators is speed of change. We buy these assets and we keep them for an incredibly long time. But the industry is moving so fast that I'm going to be sitting here going, I don't want to take that first batch of those vehicles because I'm waiting for solid state. So when you actually talk to all the other operators, they're waiting. Because what we haven't got is consistency right now. And going back to the roadmaps, there's no roadmap of technology either. And the OEMs, for all sorts of good reasons.
Phones, right? You had a Nokia.
Yeah, but a mobile phone was cheap in comparison to that kind of asset.
But for a household bill, a mobile phone, you know, you had 0 cost for a long time, and then you bought a phone that it cost you 10p to send a text message, but because it gave you a benefit and it was worth it relative to the thing. The reason why you would argue there's a delay on EVs is because the benefit is not worth the cost at the moment in most use cases, and until that's true, everything is a problem, and you may as well sit on your hands.
But I can't afford to take a risk on buying a truck that in 2 years' time either the supply is going to go bust, which is what's happening at the moment, or it's going to become a stranded asset because we've changed all the connections, legislated on protocols, and suddenly I've got a vehicle that I can't use anymore. That will cripple small family-run businesses.
From what I've seen, anyone's attempted to buy an electric HGV of that sort of size and had the problem of it being redundant yet. In the sense of, I'm sure it would be redundant in 10 years' time, especially Generation 1 technology like now, but realistically, if you can get a valuable duty cycle out of it, then it's fine. You should operate to the end of its useful life.
Yeah. But they're buying them in small numbers at the moment, and that's kind of the point to the fleet, isn't it? If you want to get adoption rates up, you need that standardisation so that they don't have great asset specificity, that you can move them around, that you can sell them on. Somebody else can use them, or you can use them on a different charging infrastructure provider. So standardisation has worked.
But what's not standardised at the moment that needs to be? If you look at the competitive markets, for example, Rolls-Royce and whoever it is, the other one, General whatever, sell every jet engine in the world, basically, apart from in China. They didn't ask for it to be standardised. They just made the best engines and it won. You didn't go to government and say you need to regulate our engine has to go on a Boeing and an Airbus. They just made the best jet turbines. Like, for me, it's the same thing. Like, the competition should win. And
but in the meantime,
ultimately, everyone buys one of 3 batteries.
Which technology do I back then, Will?
Yeah,
well,
which one do I go with as a fleet? I've got minimal margin. My entire family life is on the line here. Which one do I go with? Because I'm going to lose if I back the wrong one.
But you're not having to make the bet on what is the future technology.
Yeah, but I am at the moment.
But it's not the OEMs the one who needs to bet on a battery platform, not you.
That's why I'm not changing.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
I haven't got a clear trajectory.
But it's not a government problem to sort, or a regulatory, like a standardisation problem that will fix that.
Because how quickly you want to do it.
Well, the industry can solve it without the government. I mean, it doesn't require the government, but there should be an industry standard.
But for what? What are we asking for a standard for here? Like saying batteries need to be 800 volts and have to take this charge and need to deliver this much power.
So that you can operate a truck on any infrastructure.
But without anything, every truck has a CCS charger on it, so you don't need to ask for any more than that, do you? Like, what else would we want? Okay, not every parking bay can take a truck, etc. But like, what are we asking for? Like
so we're running our trucks around at the moment. We charge them on our own chargers. We have chargers at customer sites, but we're also starting to make use of a growing network as well. So there are a number of operators that, so GridServe, for example, have made some of their charging bays available for trucks. We've had some of the OEMs make their chargers that they've built on site available for trucks. We're now seeing, other depots opening up their chargers. So we're starting to see that network, and it all sits on CCS2 right now.
And that's kind of the point.
We don't see any megawatt charging.
But ZHID is saying that some of the charge points have to put megawatt chargers in as part of the project, I believe. So we're going to have trucks with megawatt chargers that aren't compatible with CCS.
So I think I think we're yet to see exactly how the manufacturers react to that. But certainly when we're putting trucks on at the moment, we will put them into use cases that have a long-term, they are a long-term use cases that will sit on CCS2 chargers. And I think those trucks anyway will be, they will have a range, baked into that particular use case. So I don't think there's going to be a case for then bringing that truck up to speed with MCS. I think that
well, I know. I think I know the answer slightly, because again, CCS architecture is different on the vehicle anyway, so it's going to run at a different voltage completely. So looking at CCS and MCS is the one that's going to be the architecture. So I think you're right, Dave. I think we're going to end up naturally with, maybe urban and low distribution vehicles, maybe on CCS where we don't need it, and the more longer term on the MCS. But what I'm trying to say is, we've got ZHID in there, we've got, and again, an acronym, zero-emission heavy duty infrastructure demonstration program. And what we've got there is we have got some mandate to put some MCS chargers in there. So we'll have MCS trucks running as well.
But that's going to be on a trial basis. I mean, we're years away from MCS being.
I thought we were talking about 2040. 2040. So
yeah,
sorry,
okay.
Dave, that's what I'm going from.
But even even looking at 2030 now, then I think it will be in very specific cases when we have MCS running. Still, we'll have the vast majority running around CCS too. I believe. I mean, I just think
But the manufacturer's got to make that decision. Are we going to put MCS in there all the time and run them? Don't have to run them. You can then run them at 150 kilowatt or 3, say, but just have that charger port running. You can run it at lower. Unless anyone has told me any different. So it's just the fact that you can run at maximum. So is the CCS port going to be outdated by then? And are you going to put an MCS in there and just run it 150 kilowatt, 350 kilowatt, 500 kilowatt, and just use the same port?
I think there's a couple of precedents we can already look at in this space. So the first one I'd look at is CHAdeMO, which is the old car charging standard. The market won out, and now you will struggle to buy a CHAdeMO based vehicle. So market won, the right incentives were in place, but equally BYD used to run buses in London which had a twin port AC charging unit on, very effective, but the mayor came along and decided that the new TfL spec should be CCS only. So if we don't provide information to the decision makers who are making these decisions, you will get an outcome that is adverse to what one party might want. And in this case, BYD lost out. They had a proprietary twin port charging standard. They now have to install CCS as standard. So that put a cost into their business because no one had engaged with them around what was going on. So we had decision makers in TfL making decisions which they believed was the right thing, but BYD ultimately didn't believe was the right thing. So going back to Will's point, there's like this tipping point, this balance between market forces and trying to make sure that decision makers are sufficiently informed that if you really do want legislation, everybody gets what they want out of legislation, which is why I'm super nervous about going, we should just legislate everything.
Yeah, I think so. You look at Windrose is the same because they had two CCSs either side. And so what I'm trying to say is we need something to at least give us some sort of standard, because again, a truck that's coming in that's 2.5, 2.8 meters wide, a charge there, but it's a bit different to try and get a charge across there. We've all been through this and we all know about it. And I think these are the things that we should be now deciding, be ahead of I'm not saying it's a problem now, but I think we should be thinking about these things now so that we can solve the future, not wait till it's a big problem. And I think we've got
that's
some
why
issues.
I'm being provocative, because as a fleet
That's
manager,
why I'm doing it as well.
do I do I go to my DNO thinking I'm going to have MCS network, or do I put in CCS network, and where are those costs now? Because I've got to think about it now to meet those deadlines for 2040, because in 2040 I'm not going to be able to buy the traditional vehicle that I buy.
Yeah.
And if I've got to invest early enough, then what am I investing in? And unfortunately at the moment, the market is too risky. And when I say that, it's, I don't know which technology is coming out, and I don't know which supplier is still going to be around.
Yeah, and I just want to say that megawatt charging doesn't mean megawatt charging. You can put 150,
No, I know.
350. But I think that's the problem we've got, is as soon as you say megawatt charging, people think half a megawatt, up to 3 megawatts in theory. But you can stick it in there and you can pull 150, 350. And I think that's what I'm trying to get people to differentiate. Megawatt charging doesn't mean megawatt charging.
But we all know this. But your general fleet manager won't.
I have no idea what it is, and I don't want to know what it is either. Because
that's great,
if we're going to get adoption in the industry, it's got to be simple enough for people to do. And if everyone has to get to this level of detailed knowledge to do anything, Christ, it'll take forever. Yeah?
And that's why we're all here, mate.
And that's why I think, we talked earlier on about roadmaps. You talked about it, and those roadmaps have strands within them, don't they? Yeah. It doesn't mean that we're asking the government to do everything for us, but it does mean we try and find the answers which will help people to adopt, because they won't have to find everything else out for themselves for the first time every time. And I think that's one of the things that we really should do more of. Share the knowledge. Hats off to you, for doing that, because I was there when you were stood on stage on Coventry going through all that stuff. Yeah. That's what we need more of. If everyone's got to learn everything from scratch, God, we'll be still having this conversation. Well, my kids will be having this conversation, not me.
I was just going to say that, to be fair to say DFT, like the ZEHA program is there to deploy vehicles in a demonstrator phase, for that learning to be shared. And I think they've started to close down, if you look at the way the funding been deployed, non-electric routes, like the hydrogen projects received little funding and the vehicles are going to be very expensive and it's going to be a dead end. So in reality, I feel like they've done step one, which was demonstrate that electric vehicles work, demonstrate where the cost blockers are, and then phase two should be, okay, now we want to deploy these beyond the trial phase or beyond sort of tens of and into thousands of. What's missing from industry, or what do you need in order to get to those thousands? And the reality is we're going to turn around and say, well, it costs too much relative to diesel. And I think then you walk into the problem of there's a few other minor things, like you've got axle weights that's a problem, or etc. And you've also got, ultimately, there's some stuff that DFT can't do anything about, like, well, energy's too expensive, and that's not a DFT problem. Yes, you've got things like D&O issues, like connection times. I think market forces can solve some of those problems, but I don't, for example, think market forces can solve the cost of energy on its own. Conscious that might be slightly hypocritical coming from an energy background. There's then the one sector that, if it was complete,
another industry that needs help, isn't it?
Well, no, energy. All energy would require is, like, for example, what has happened in the hydrogen world is that hydrogen projects have now received dispensation. They can have energy intensive industry dispensation on the cost of energy, and they get another £10 a megawatt hour cheaper electricity than we do in other sectors. We could do that for commercial fleets tomorrow. That would save, but £10 a megawatt hour is not going to be a game changer, but it's better than nothing. There's a few things like that where I think you could easily make it easier in the short term to see adoption improve.
But on that a bit, energy, and I want to come back to another question as well, but on the energy point, I think in some respects, because the UK has traditionally had a lot of reliance on gas and also in terms of electricity itself, there's been a lot of sources of that. But fundamentally, the UK is a high energy cost market if you look at Europe. And so one of my questions that we kind of circled around, but we haven't kind of got to the bottom of is, for me, yes, I understand there's not a lot of hydropower naturally in the UK, which is a disadvantage, right? However, surely in the sort of digital age, you can be so much more clever around supply and demand of energy that you take away some of the peak demand, but also just in terms of how it flows. I'm just putting that out there as, because if you reduce that from a competition perspective, you think about UK PLC, it would make us so much more competitive.
Yeah, but I don't think the logistics industry or the freight industry doesn't need to be, it can obviously join in with the conversation with government, but government's acutely aware that UK energy is too expensive and that it makes us uncompetitive globally. I think that you can just let that ship carry on sailing, so to speak, as in, Greg Jackson moans about it every day. There's a lot of people moan about it, and unfortunately it's not trivial to change it, but equally, because basically anything that moves from an energy bill has to be put into general taxation. The same as, for example, removing vehicle excise duty and putting that into general taxation. It's all going to have to come from somewhere, and these are the things that I think we could have, that would be a sensible one to lobby for, to say, well, because I constantly hear people sort of say, well, we're not going to go electric or zero emission for trucks because of the government are too scared of losing the vehicle excise. I'm sure that's been thought through. Someone must have thought about this. There's no way they just sat there and gone, there's a £3 billion black hole, I'm just going to have to deal with it. They'll have thought about it. Ultimately, they have to be comfortable with it.
Complain about what they're going to do.
No, but ultimately it's going to go into general taxation. It's the only way it can happen, or, because otherwise the electric vehicles will not be better than the diesel. So maybe that should be one of our asks to government, is we just need a clear position to lobby on, which is like, just get on with this stuff.
But it all goes to that competitive advantage point, doesn't it? Because the industry will invest money to save money. Yeah, it does that all the time. Yeah. You see it on, we were talking about warehouse automation at lunch, weren't we? So there'll be it would unlock money to come in if the narrative changed from go green and it costs more and is less flexible to go green and it saves money and it's at least as flexible. And I think that there's actually a national opportunity in this. Yeah, if you think about cost of logistics is in everything that is consumed. But I think it's you have to approach it with that mindset rather than just sort of chucking the legislation out and leaving everybody to it.
And how much, because I think a lot of what Vin's been mentioned in terms of the megawatt charging, for example, and also the sort of the different standards on different manufacturers, etc. But how much of what we're talking about now is actually driven by the fact that technology is progressing, moving forward at such a pace now compared to, I mean, for, I don't know, we always make these points around for 80 years or whatever, the vehicle industry moved in sort of mini steps, whereas now we're taking a massive leap. And so I think for me, there's two questions. One is, what is the end state? That we don't actually know what the end state is. But the other piece is around, again, coming back to the point of competitiveness. So let's say that you move now, you buy a few trucks or you lease a few trucks, whatever, they have certain capacities, capabilities, the weight thing, who knows, that might change, which would change the whole ball game as well. How much is this for the industry a question of competitiveness and kind of needing to almost all move in tandem? Because if you don't, depending on whether you sit on it for a while or you go early, that might completely change the competitive position. And how much is that holding us back?
I think legislation and regulation means you all move with the tide. If you do something different, then the competitiveness comes in, and you're either at an advantage or a disadvantage at this moment in time. I think also what is an interesting question, we have ZEV mandates for cars and vans.
No.
Should we have, all right then, I'll throw two things in then. Should we have ZEV mandates for trucks?
No.
Or should we have also demand ZEV mandates for operators as well?
Right.
Just, come on, I'll just throw that in. It's what government are talking about. It's certainly on the cards. I'm not saying, but certainly it's things that we talk about. In fact, someone at DFT has got on the title ZEV mandates for trucks. So you look at it and say, okay, what's our view on ZEV mandates? But also, if you put it on the truck manufacturers, which has always been the way that the truck manufacturers have been done, and then they might say, well, hey, why don't you put it on the operators as well? Because you've got to create demand as well.
So it's gone on to the operators in the car and van world, whether we wanted it to or not. Correct. Because what happens is we are now being held to ransom by the OEMs. So every time, and they put it in letters as well, some of them, if you want to buy 10 diesels, you have to buy 10% electric, even if you can or can't do it. And so we're now being held to ransom. What that does is a couple of things. One, it makes you beholden to one supplier because you can't shop around and go with multiple suppliers. So if you've got a need or you've got a problem with one supplier, you're kind of stuck. So that's the downside of it. The upside, for some of my peers in the industry, it actually forced them to move. But you've got a double-edged sword on ZEV mandate stuff.
Yeah.
If I take us back to, we did the rally, Green Fleet Rally, went around and we were tracked and it was done pictorially. And you watch these little wiggly worms, all different colours, were all the different fleets and people going around. And you had targets. So each day you had to be somewhere. And what you saw visually was all of those people doing it differently. They all still got to the target. Some went slowly, some just wanted to be out there and first pass that finish line, and others meandered, did other little bits and pieces on the way, but every single person got to the target. So do we need a mandated year by year by year progression, or do we accept that actually 2040 is the deadline, let fleets figure how they're getting there?
Or 2035.
Or 2035 for the 26th. Right. And it is a double-edged sword because without a ZEV mandate, no offence OEMs, but they wouldn't move because why do they need to? They're making money in what they've already got. Why do they have to move? So you do need something to push people through. But I think a ZEV mandate, especially on the truck side where you have so much more variety, variability and margin challenges, is going to be a step too far, and you'll actually push more people out of business than you'll get to persuade to transition.
Go on, Andy.
Just my two
pennies.
pennies.
It's an illusion as well. I think it's the illusion of action. Yeah, it isn't action because you're not dealing with all the things we've been dealing with today and talking about. So solve the problems rather than just pretend they don't exist.
I would slightly differ. I think that I understand that the ZEV mandate has challenges. I think though that we need some intermediate targets between now and 2040, because I think a lot of people, it seems quite far away.
The charging side might want a little bit of a ZEM mandate that creates demand for the...
Lots of the problems that we're talking about are partially driven by a lack of economies of scale in the HGV industry. There's just really not very many of them, and everyone's doing first-of-a-kind projects and things like that. So if there was more volume, that there would potentially be reductions in vehicle platform costs, that there would be much greater understanding of what the investment requirements are going to be around charging infrastructure, what electricity demand would look like, so we'd get closer to electricity supply contract. We need to do something to get people moving rather than have everyone think, do you know what I'll do? I'll just wait until 2037 and then I'll give some lobbying guys sort of £500,000, couple of million quid and try and get it changed and push back. Because it won't happen unless there's something we have to do now.
It is, but it's just beware of the unintended consequences.
Andy, Nick, what are your views on it?
A similar thing, that the ZEV mandate piece is just, I see it as being too restrictive at the moment. I think there may be an argument for it further down the line, but not yet. I just think it's too early. I get your point. I do get your point completely, but I think that the mandate side of it would probably come outside the trucks themselves, outside the operator side of it, from my perspective. I think it's too restrictive.
Well, if you take take a step up and say, right, okay, what's the problem? Too much CO2. We could price carbon, but we don't want to do that because it makes us internationally uncompetitive. Okay, so then you could be effectively have industrial strategy and point targets at industries or mandates at industries. The problem with that is then it hurts that one industry relative to others, and it maybe potentially doesn't deliver your best bang for your buck on carbon savings. For me, the simplest way to do it would be, we need to create a structure whereby the thing you want wins on cost and all the problems will go away. So, for example, rather than having a mandate without any structure to support the cost, I would, for example, either subsidise electricity to make it cheaper, therefore electrification will go up, or find ways of reducing costs otherwise if we believe this is the best value bang for our buck on carbon savings. For example, I don't know, having capex support mechanisms or zero interest loans on the vehicles to reduce the RV problem, or whatever it be, things that would directly incentivise the adoption of trucks relative to electric versus diesel. Like, I feel like rather than encouraging for a mandate without any carrots to help us get there, it would make sense to do it the other way around and say, we just make this cheaper, the industry will solve the problem, because those who don't are going to have a cost disadvantage, and the industry is incredibly good at finding ways to take advantage of cost advantages. Like, for me, it's a simplistic way to do it. Conscious that isn't typically the way the UK's nailed its approach.
No, but it is the way other countries have done it.
Indeed, yes.
And they've got better adoption rates. So we should look at those.
Yeah.
You know, there are incentives out there, and where they've been employed, they've got better adoption rates. I don't think they've solved all the problems by any stretch of the imagination, but they're certainly further along the road.
It creates an incentive to find ways to solve those problems, and then all of a sudden, if you're at the last 25% of your fleet that can't decarbonise because of an axle weight limit, you go, well, I've done everything I can. It's cheaper for me to do it. The only reason I'm not buying these last trucks is because they're mass constrained because of this. It's a much better conversation with DFT or National Highways or government. Whereas when you're just going, well, everything's really hard and it's really expensive, it's not a particularly productive conversation, is it? You don't get any sympathy.
I wonder whether the problem is partly not. I mean, I think I struggle to see that the industry would just all come together without any characteristics along the way, come together at one particular point in time and everyone's ready. I mean, I really struggle to see that scenario. However, I also struggle to see a scenario where everyone is in a winning position with only sticks and no carrots. So we haven't got to that today and we're running out of time, but I'm wondering whether that's one of the things that we need to pick up on in terms of where are the carrots in terms of...
Treasury doesn't have any carrots.
Well, there's no money.
The stable's bare, the horses have eaten all the carrots, or donkeys.
That's simply short-term accounting, because if you look at the benefits of electrification to our economy as a whole in the long term, it should be there. So really, it is for government to be able to take a view beyond a single term and say, yes, we believe in these benefits and we're going to create mechanism to unlock those benefits to UK industry.
So that's why DFT and DESNZ have got together, right? So they've got a team from DESNES and DFT combined trying to address exactly this problem. Those are the people we should be talking to.
Yeah, I agree with Phil.
And I don't think we are.
Yeah, I'm with you, mate. I don't.
Yeah, there's a couple of sessions that have gone on recently with that audience and also combining with DBT as well. Because effectively you have to have all three of them together.
Yeah,
Yep,
you have
I
to.
agree with that.
And what they haven't got to yet is the devolved nations, but I think that will come with that.
I think they've got to, because transport's got, we need all of
we
them
do.
together. You know, the borders, logistic borders don't finish at Newcastle and Carlisle and Bristol. We're all going to work together.
The thing I'm conscious of, what we want to avoid is the sort of populist backlash that's gone against, say, wind or solar at times, where people say, well, that's increased my bills, even though there's no truth in that. But so the point would be, you know, the way they need to solve it for freight is to not make it out as it's just through virtue it's being done. It's through the long-term competitive advantage it delivers to the economy, which is why it's being done, and therefore it's an investment, it's not a cost.
And I don't know what the numbers are on electricity, but 70% total cost of ownership of a vehicle is diesel over the life. So, you know, I suspect it's a bit lower than that, isn't it, because of the capex, the relative capital and running costs. But the biggest single chunk of money, you know, even if it's 50-50, it's going to be the cost of electricity.
The challenge though is, so in terms of running an electric vehicle and comparing it to a diesel vehicle, obviously the price of the vehicle, we've already talked about the price of the vehicle, and it is higher, and we'll see that drop over time, hopefully, with battery prices predominantly. Electricity, I mean, the raw cost of electricity, like for like with diesel, is cheaper than diesel right now. The challenge that we've got on the interim is funding the charging network and because someone's got to pay for that. It's not a free option. So, you know, we need to think about, you know, that shorter to medium term challenge of how we start getting the charging network out there to unlock the cheaper electricity. There is a shorter term, 2030 and before, prize of unlocking that cheaper electricity. And I agree with your point, Will, that ultimately market forces won't bring electricity prices down, and that will be required over time. But ultimately, even now, compared to diesel, we need to remember that it's still a cheaper form of fuel.
I think we need to be clearer on what we mean by electricity price and perhaps charging price, because you've got an electricity price that comes into a site like this.
Exactly.
But actually what you need to consider is your total cost of charging. So I think, Will, you've been quoting sort of 25p as a lovely target per kilowatt hour, but we know in the public domain on a car, you can easily spend 85 or 90p a kilowatt hour. That 85 or 90p includes VAT, so your business can get that back straight away, but it also includes all that capital cost.
If we had to build our petrol stations again, then
If you're
guess
building
what?
petrol
Price of
stations
diesel
again.
would go up.
Correct.
So
We're changing the infrastructure, and therefore it comes with a cost, but we've also got to be very clear when we're communicating about the cost of electricity or the cost of charging, what the difference is. And we're very good at TCO models for our vehicles. We need to do TCC models, total cost of charging, for our charging. So we understand why 85p is 85p, but also so we can understand why charging in public at a Milant site at 39.9 might be preferable to putting hundreds of thousands of pounds of capital to work in your own site. Pros and cons to both approaches, but it needs to be considered in a holistic context.
the medium-term view is actually very attractive. It's a very attractive, you know, benefits case, and I think we're starting to see that in some of the TCO models that are coming out. But we obviously need to get there in the first place, and I think that we do that by slowly starting to bring in use cases that work. I know there's a lot of talk about, you know, just move to greener, you know, sort of decarbonised transport being more expensive. It is, but there are use cases that very clearly they do work now. We're showing it. You know, you can make use cases work now, and it's not all use cases, but there are use cases that already work, and that's only going in one direction right now. So, you know, we need to, I think, recognise that, and you know, continue to shout about the benefits of the vehicles.
All I'd flag is on the resi side, for example, although there was grants for the vehicles, I don't believe there's been funding for chargers into resi properties. I think it's effectively been
Depot charging, isn't it?
So I suppose my point being, like, the chargers, because they delivered the cheaper unit of fuel, the capex decision on the charger was made by the homeowner. And I feel like it's only because the economic case isn't quite good enough at times as to why capital support would be needed for the chargers. Like if it was 5p a kilowatt hour, people could build a business case around a charger at £1 million quite easily. It's just because it's 17 and then...
Yeah, but we don't take a truck home.
You can't... No, but whether it will be public or private, the point being is it's total cost of charging is the cheaper the power, the easier it is to build a business case around that. And so that's kind of the only thing I'd add to that. Like it's...
Lessons learned from the car and van world. We need to balance the carrot and the stick. Your point, Marie, if they have too much carrot, then actually what we see is, and it happened in the van world, manufacturers leave the UK market because it's just too difficult to deal with and they don't make enough profit. They go to other marketplaces first, and we've seen a sway of that. So it's getting the balance right between, well, what is an incentive? Actually, sometimes it's not always the fiscal side of things. You just need to remove all the barriers. And some of those barriers are planning permission rules, making sure that if you're a logistics company that are operating out of a rented premises, that the landlord doesn't turn around and say you can't have your charger. It's some of those barriers that actually don't cost the government any money, because let's face it, there is none. How do you actually change some of what's in place to make it easier? So when we want to go, and I'm assuming there's going to be another one of these meetings because all we've done here is talk and not kind of take any actions. I'm assuming then that what we'll get out of that is more of a, what things did we know that didn't work very well? So let's try and not make that same mistake. How can we get to government to get them to change some of the things that they can change that don't cost money? Understanding that if it's in primary legislation, it's going to take us years to get it changed, because getting anything through and out of primary legislation takes a long time. So we need to work out whether the rules, 4.25 is in primary legislation. Yeah. That's why it's taken as long to change. The axle weights are likely to be the same. So which of those things are going to take longer, and can we start now so that when we're ready for it, we can get there and take those? So it's a real balancing act on those costs versus things we can do now, which is just, I say simple changes. We're all simplifying, I think, some of these challenges in some of the legislation that's out there already. And again, going back to what Phil was saying, it's there's devolved governments as well. Everybody's got to work together, and that's the problem. We're not. We say we are, but unless you're a group like this that are all quite altruistic and let's get on with it, most people, point you made earlier, human behaviour, we're naturally greedy. You've got those land grabbing, you've got those thinking they're making a fast buck out of it. How do we actually make it easier for people to transition?
And it's not just about the legislation change per se. I think it's about the fact that somebody has acknowledged the challenge, is looking at it and dealing with it, and that we've got some sort of direction so that I can make decisions. Yeah. And it sounds like, so that to me, that's I recognise that, it's not going to be something that happens overnight, but just having a view that says we're all moving in the right direction, and we hear that acknowledgement from DfT or the government, whoever that needs to be, then that's helpful in its own right.
Yeah. We don't have to do it all tomorrow. No, transition, not cliff edge.
Yeah, it's the old saying of recognising the problem is halfway to solving the problem, and I think that's and I don't think we do. I think because again, we've not been set up for this. This, what we came into this decade, and now we're going out of it two completely different ways, and none of us have got a roadmap yet at the moment. So
on the weight side, I mean, I think it's the single biggest thing that that we can change in the industry to level the playing field. And I hear a lot of noise, and there's been noise coming from all sorts of camps over the last couple of years. But I haven't yet heard someone grabbing that and acknowledging it, and I think that will make a big difference.
The DfT have reached out and said, look, one of the challenges that they have is that everybody has their own interest, and everybody expresses their own opinion. I've shared with some of the team. I lead the SMT heavy committee now. The SMT is the body that DfT looks to for a consistent OEM view, and it's been very hard to get to that point. I have to say, some of you have been part of the conversations, and some of you have made your inputs, but you have some manufacturers who are going for the moon and beyond, and there are others who are quite happy just to sort of just open the gate. And my desire in trying to sort of channel those views is just let's get it through the door into DfT. I believe that door is open to us to have grown-up conversations about some of the issues that we're facing. You're right, Laura, there's no chance of us changing any primary legislation whatsoever. But what DfT have previously said is, look, we'll help you work through the legislation that is in place, and we'll help you change the bits that we can change today, and we'll start to communicate internally, because DFT is not one organisation. Of course, it's a whole panoply of different interest groups. You've got the pothole people, you've got the legislation people, you've got the safety people, you've got the weights and dimensions people. It's a morass of people that we're trying to deal with. And what we've been able to do over a period of time is build some good relationships whereby they actually trust us to come with coherent and credible proposals that they can then take back within government into people who frankly don't understand what a truck is. I mean, that you're talking about the learning from cars and vans. For goodness sake, it's taken us 5 years to tell them that a truck is not the same as a car and a van. Because if you look at the plug-in vehicle brand, it was a nightmare because some monkey thought it was a Toyota Yaris or something. We think, no, it doesn't translate. But we have there's some good advocates within DFT who've been there for a period of time. There's some bright people who are willing to work with us. My goodness, I want to take advantage of that and actually make some change. Because, as Philip, you and I were saying, this is urgent. We can't sit on our hands and imagine things are going to happen in 2039 or 2034 because it's going to be too late by that stage.
We had a great session actually with the Secretary of State and said, did you realise that if we don't change what we're doing on weights, that we're potentially going to need 20% more drivers? And I was like...
Considering we've got a shortage already.
The Secretary turned around to his fish and said, did we know this? Yeah. And they're like, well, yeah. But I think it's wrapped up in other things. You know, there's a big transport safety review coming, and I think it's definitely wrapped up in that. And you know, whether we need that or not is a conversation for another day.
As well.
But and the nature of responsibility for road maintenance, I think, is also a big problem with this. There's a lot of regulatory stakeholders.
And whilst it's the most cohesive they've ever been, which is a really positive, it is still too many individual government departments don't understand the thing. So the 4.25, one of the other reasons it's taken forever is the government didn't even realise that if they don't change that, that's a whole raft, millions more vehicles that now fall into MOT testing for HGVs.
Yeah.
And that's them that do the testing and they don't have the resource.
Yeah. And you know, we've really been through that process of, if you like, education in a way with the DFT. But at some point you get beyond the point of education where it says, yeah, but what else is this wrapped up in? And I think that's where we are at the minute. Yeah.
Yeah, you get the mood music from them.
You do. And at that point, probably getting beyond all officials becomes necessary.
So I think you've listed, I've just written down, so in terms of that sort of government angle, there is the classification and the weights and that sort of piece. There is the piece around what could carrots potentially be, even though the horses have already been on some of them, but hopefully some of them are left back in the cupboard somewhere. And then it's that piece around actually the government themselves need to make sure that they are coordinated, because you in the room and others can't keep talking to different parts and they all know different pieces of the puzzle. Someone has to have the full view, I guess. Those are some of the points I made around the government, but coming back to Lorna's point around what are the next steps for us, I guess. We're meant to start to wrap up at 2:40, but I'm going to start a bit early because I think it'd be good to get a little bit more time on this. So just walking around the room, I mean, we talked a bit about digital and data and the charging and making it all efficient. I personally don't think we've spent enough time on it, because I think there's so much more that you could get out of the digital opportunities that we have.
In terms of sort of maximising the extent to which that assets are right-sized across the whole system and pushing utilisation as high as possible. Because yes, electrification is expensive at the moment, but it's even more expensive if you oversize everything.
Yeah.
So for sure, yeah, it'd be valuable to sort of explore that further, I think.
Yeah, and I suppose in terms of actions and how we should approach that, where is because we keep coming back to and I do as well, in terms of the education and information and spreading the word, etc., but what is some of the tangible, is it well known? Is it a conversation that you need to have with, or we need to have with government as well, around we're not actually taking advantage of the full digital capability that we have? Is it to talk to the operators? I mean,
I think it's at two levels. I think that there is a government aspect to it, which relates to some of the work that Phil and his team do in relation to sort of overall systems planning, in terms of trying to ensure that data that could be collected that would enable modelling to take place, which would enable better policy decisions, is actually undertaken. And then I think actually at a sort of industry level, I think that there's value in fleets and solution providers exploring this issue further, because there's already a lot of data sharing that happens between fleets to make supply chains work. But and that this is just some extra dimensions that need to be added into it to sort of enable the interface with the sort of wider energy system. And so I think there would be value in sort of more dialogue on that topic about how we can extend the existing systems, perhaps, to do that.
And in terms of the vehicles, we had the early conversation around the OEMs and where they're at, and then we sort of drifted off into other directions. But if you think about actions from a fleet perspective vis-a-vis the OEMs, I mean, we're all aware of the situation the OEMs are in. They're not making any money on the e-trucks, but at some point they need to get there. So what is sort of, for example, is it well understood what fleet operators need now, and is that what the OEMs are focusing on, or are the OEMs actually looking at where they need to go and they just sell the products kind of where they are on that path? They're selling those products at that point, or what's the sort of understanding of?
I think the technology roadmap is probably reasonably well understood. There are some open questions around battery technology, for example. Do sodium batteries, do solid state batteries have a part to play? In what time scale, and can those be done economically? That, to be honest, that last point is where the question mark is now, because frankly the OEMs have had their fingers burnt. The billions that have gone into developing these technologies with absolutely zero payback to date is eye-watering. So there's almost right, what's happening in the next 2, 3, 5 years time from a technology point of view? So what can mainstream operators expect? So the 600 kilometre range vehicle, for example, will be mainstream by the end of next year. That's the sort of thing that needs to be fully understood, and operators need to have the confidence to plan around, because actually that does open up the vast majority of operations. The developments in charging, we've got lots of experts in the room to bring those alongside. Yeah, what the vehicles and the system can do, I think, are fairly well understood. There is a challenge to the legislative side and actually addressing some of the inequalities from the technology at this point. There is an issue, I think it comes back to the data one again. Unfortunately, we've been a very lazy industry in that we've over-specified everything. You know, every traction in the UK is a 6x2, not because it needs to be a 6x2, because the residual value is greater on a 6x2 than it is on a 4x2. When I was talking about dynamic charging, we need to start to have energy as a core part of the operational mix, because it's never been thought about before. It's never been necessary before. It's how big is your tank? I mean, that's as big as the question has got. It's not to be disrespectful of fleet manager, but you know, for the guys in Ireland, it's, you know, I need 1,000 litres. For the guys who are just trundling around the East Midlands, it's I need not 250 will do. So this is another part of that educational piece, which will take a lot of time, a lot of pain, because respectfully, most fleet managers aren't as knowledgeable and mouthy as the one we have in the group today, or the operators, other operators were represented on the table. People like life to be as simple as possible. They're not generally in life to sort of, they think that they started in the workshop, they've worked through the organisation, they still want to have oil under their fingernails. They don't really trust data because they've had their fingers burned. So again, the way that we as experts in inverted commas communicate the lessons and the opportunities is going to be critical. Technology is fine, it'll look after itself, and there shouldn't be any significant bumps aside from which side of the truck you've got your MCS charger in.
I think, go on, mate, finish.
But actually, sadly, we're going to have to take people by the hand. I've been having these conversations for many years, representing the manufacturers, and I came into those 18 months ago with somebody else, another manufacturer at that point, and I realised just how much we're going to have to repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat the messaging, because unfortunately either the lessons are so ingrained from years of doing stuff in a different manner, or there's lots of missing and indeed disinformation that's out there, which is ringing very loudly in people's ears, and unfortunately we have to unpick some of that before we can actually present the positive arguments.
Yeah, I mean, I really do agree with all of that. And this is about decarbonisation for businesses, not electrification. Electrification is a solution for decarbonisation, but it's not the only one. For it to become a more credible and therefore more widespread solution, I think we do need to tackle some of the barriers that we've talked about today. And I think the creation of that roadmap with some of those milestones along the way that you described would also be a way of creating a lot more confidence in the buyers of logistics that this is a credible solution for the long term. Yeah. And therefore, and once you get the buyers interested, the operators come because they have no choice but to come. Yeah. So confidence building in the buying, in the big fleet operators and the buying community would be the other thing that would come from creating this roadmap. But we do need to do it. We just don't need to take too long.
Phil's made a good point there, though. So I think sometimes I can forget that there's still a debate around the future scenario for decarbonisation of freight. Because, for example, I saw the RHA stuff recently coming out. 85% of our members think hydrogen is going to play a significant role in the decarbonisation of road freight. That's a nightmare because, one, it goes to DFT and implies that there's uncertainty. It gives a signal to OEMs that they still need to keep investing in fuel cell technology, which is, again, a nightmare for them because it's double technology bets. And clearly they're getting some information from somewhere that implies that's a sensible strategy to pursue. So it means you may as well delay. So for me, like, probably the first piece, and one of the reasons why I personally like try and engage with things like this, other than because I'm altruistic, is because I'm like, the quicker we can at least land on certainty of what is most likely to be the outcome, whether not the specific battery technology, not the specific charging technology, not, you know, whether it be battery swaps over Hecatino, etc. But the point being, it's almost certainly going to be electric. Then now it's a question of which flavour of electrification is going to be the case. The same with things like industrial heat decarbonisation, etc. It's going to be electric. It's not going to be biogas, for example, etc. Those sort of things are important to help then at least create consistency of what the kind of lobbying is into government, and also, you know, let's OEMs ditch expensive R&D and, you know, development cycles, etc. Just it helps us, you know.
So I'm just imagining Will having the conversation with the MP for Derby.
Yeah, if you need me to dispel everyone on hydrogen, I've run a hydrogen business. I've lost a lot of money on a hydrogen business. I'm an expert.
We know Will.
Why not to start a hydrogen business? So I have first-hand experience. But you know, the RHA thing came out in the summer, so that's, you know, a month ago. And I sit here believing that everyone's under the assumption of how do I electrify my logistics, and the reality is most people are saying, well, I'm not even worried about decarbonisation full stop, but if I was, I've got a choice to make.
I think you've got to be,
you know, most
pragmatic.
companies are small.
Sorry.
Most transport companies are small.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's family money. Yeah.
That's it. I think you've got to realise we're in a fishbowl sometimes. We're talking to like-minded people. There's a hell of a lot of operators out there that just all they're trying to do is make some money tomorrow and that week and everything. And I think that's the key. And also, like Phil says, is it a decarbonisation? It's all about, you know, we couldn't electrify next week. None of us could. We couldn't electrify all the 40,000 trucks get sold every year. Every year in terms of every truck, we could not. The manufacturers couldn't keep up with that. Just one country out of 27 countries, the EU, But I think it's important that we realise, so that's going to take a long time. And in that is all the players, things that we talked about, CNG, LNG, bios, all those sort of things are still players in this market to decarbonise. But what I will say is, don't be too despondent. 19 hours ago, Karen Radstrom just put in, a CEO Daimler, for the first time ever, all major European truck manufacturers, the grid operators and the EU policy makers met for the first time ever. And they're just getting to grips with it now. And so we look at ourselves and think we're behind it. They've only just met today, 19 hours ago or whatever it was. So there's a lot to do. They've recognised that. And they're looking at, if you look at that, there's 1,200 public chargers. We need 35 charging points by 2030. That's 500 charging points every month. You think we've got problems?
But I think, Tim, that brings up a really interesting point, I think, which comes back to what Lorna said around having intermediate targets, which as painful as they are, which I completely understand, is it's almost like, is there something, and you have all the data, so I'm sure there is a way of doing this, where you go, if we don't plan ahead, if there weren't for people like the people around this table and others, to actually get us going on this, and we get to a brick wall in 2040 or whatever year we're assuming, you know, the size of the challenge then, I think it'd be quite easy to show how impossible that is. So if everyone came to UKPN and all the rest of the DNOs at one point in time and said, we've completely missed the boat on this, we need to electrify now, it's not possible. You don't have the people to do it, you don't have
That's what truck operators do, though.
Yeah,
they leave it to the last minute. And it's like we've seen with Euro 3, Euro 4, Euro 5, they wait to the very last minute, they put an order in and then hopefully do it. And that's the mentality that you're dealing with.
But is there some sort of articulation of why this is important, why we need a roadmap and everything? Because actually, societally, we can't deal with
education and communication. We said that right at the beginning.
So digitally, we've got the capability now to model the UK from a freight perspective, but also from a transport perspective. So rail, maritime, and air, and that's a facility we can use to play out scenarios. So all of these questions, you know, it's best guess, right? But it is a holistic picture where you can explore interdependencies and you can say policy on, policy off, this is the prioritisation that companies have, whatever it is. That facility allows you to communicate effectively with government. And we already have the ears of the government for that. That's why they put the money in. So, you know, there is a digital capability. Now, I recognise the need to separate digital capability from real world capability. Yeah, but there is a digital capability to take a whole systems view, and we should engage with it.
Phil, can that handle things like axle weights out of interest? As in, can you put that scenario through to show the relative adoption? Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
That would be a good way to
different size of vehicles that don't exist now. You can put hydrogen into the mix and see how it gets adopted or not. You can put autonomous vehicles in, change the cost models. You can see where warehousing would move to if you use more rail, you know, and that changes the charging infrastructure. So there's a lot of work you can do with those tools.
Yeah, I also think it's worth pointing out that the UK has, being an island nation, has a unique opportunity in the sense of almost everything lands in the UK in like one of 4 places and is moved around on one of 7 motorways, whatever the number is. It's not a lot. Like, whereas in Europe, it's actually a lot harder because you've got, well,
an island.
It's going all over the place and you need multi-jurisdiction alignment and charging. And yes, okay, there's certain things that they have that helps them, but there's also a lot of things that make it more challenging, you know, and you're traveling from different energy zones and pricing, et cetera, et cetera. So like, although we have challenges as an island and you know, we also have some advantages that we can kind of take our own opinion on how we want to do it. I think that is worth pointing out when we think about it, you know.
Yeah, we've got boundaries.
We have boundaries and therefore we have fixed points of entry. So you don't have to electrify everything everywhere in one go to make it work.
We have to make sure we don't beat ourselves up.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say.
Even if everybody around this table and everyone in government and all OEMs, if everything was ready today, we still wouldn't transition everything today, because there's also that physical side of it. it does take time to electrify a port. Simple example, port, nearest transmission point, need a hell of a lot of power there. There's a really great big city in the middle. How the hell are you going to connect the two? So it's not as simple as it sounds, even if everybody said yes, even if all those households said, I don't mind if the cable goes across the top of my house. It's not that simple. So we have to remember that we can't beat ourselves up when we're not seeing things happening just because we want it to move fast enough. It is moving. We just have to remember that we can't quite do it all at the same time.
So an interesting example, Port of Dover. If they go with electric ferries, what impact does that have on the freight operations that operate near to the port? Because those ferries are arriving every 45 minutes and need to charge.
How much does a ferry need, out of interest?
I've got the figure somewhere.
A lot.
I've got some horrific figures as well.
Yeah, I think it was for 2 ferries, they needed 50 megawatt supply.
But a couple of weeks ago, we met. So there's a loose organisation called the Alliance of Logistics Trade Associations. There's 12 of us, and we met. We were talking with the UK Major Ports Group, who were one of the members, around exactly that, and their approach to decarbonisation and what their proposals are that they were putting in for the major ports into government. And again, we had the same conversation actually we've had now, which is don't just make it about ports. Yeah. In the same way as I said earlier, don't make it just about roads. And actually, so there is a bit more perhaps collaboration behind the scenes than maybe is immediately obvious.
So interesting, Port of Dover again. 2 of the ferry operators decided independently that they were going to go to electric ferries without talking to Dover, right? And 2 of them have decided to go to ammonia without talking to the port, right? But and I raise this as an example of how disconnected and isolated and siloed we can all become. And if you do, it's a big danger area.
I think
things are happening outside our particular bubble.
I think partnerships and working together certainly comes a lot into this market as well.
But it's not natural, and it's a point Maria made earlier. There's a competitive side of it, and every company wants to keep their own data because they think they can make money out of it.
Yeah.
Every company wants to look at what they're going to do in order to beat their competitor, and everyone's scared of sharing data in case it gets used against them.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you this, I've faced that argument a lot, and people in the room know that I have. But recently, because we got a bit of money to spare, we managed to buy the data. You've already given it. It's gone to data integrators and I've got it. And you signed it away. So I don't hold with that argument.
You're breaching my GDPR rules.
No, I'm not. It's all anonymous. I don't know it's
no,
you.
I'm laughing because
but the point is the data has already been given, and we still have arguments and discussions about how confidential it is.
Yeah, I was waiting for data and GDPR to come up somewhere along the line.
So I guess moving on a little bit. So if we want to have some sort of concluding conversation as well around the grid, but also in the context of where charging needs to be, etc. So again, from this point of view of if we are all going electric in 2040, let's say, sort of what issues would we run into then? Well, there's some obvious ones, obviously, if we all went in one go. But what would be some of the points that we would want to make around the pricing of charging, the flexibility, the interoperability, the any sort of facilitation in terms of collaborating. I think we talked earlier about this piece around the DNOs can't deal with connections unless there has to be some sort of a demand signal, I guess, for you, right? That's how the framework works. So I can see issues across all of those points. How would we like to summarise that?
I think one of the things we need to try and help the government with is messaging. So again, there is no money. There's huge social pressure on the government to do this, do that, sort immigration out, sort this out, spend the money over here. So there is no way we are going to get funding for anything above NHS getting a reform or something else. So we have to work out how do we help them with messaging, and we've tried it with the clean air side of thing and savings. So how do we help them with messaging so that when they do put a policy in place for us, or they do give us an incentive, they don't get browbeaten for it from an education point of view, or we haven't given it to the schools, you know, we haven't put the money here. How do we help them navigate that? Because they're good at setting policy, they're not good at delivery. But how can we then do that delivery piece and help with the communication side?
There's no shortage of money, there's shortage of government money. So the real challenge is, how do you mobilise the private sector? How do you get the private sector to release some of the 17 trillion that sits there?
And you said there's plenty of funding from the investors out there,
Yeah.
as long as you can create that business case for why they should come and invest. And a lot of companies don't know how to ask, or that they can ask. In my case, I can't ask because I'm regulated, so I'm not allowed to use it. But there's all sorts of other challenges that everyone else can and should be taken advantage of. They just don't know.
Yeah, and that sort of comes into this question around the flexibility around how you solve your charging requirements. So, you know, I've seen business cases from all of the CPOs like Osprey, Instavolt, GridServe, and the rest of them. And you know, it's tough with the current utilization. You know, they are obviously building out their grids ahead of the volumes. Well ahead.
It's infrastructure, it's long-term investment. Trouble is, most people come into that thinking it's a quick return, and it's not.
Yeah,
it's
and
infrastructure.
also if they debt finance, you know, the lenders don't care about that.
Isn't there a virtuous circle here where you accelerate the investment in infrastructure, which accelerates the investment in adoption of electric trucks, which accelerates the return on investment?
But I think the
Okay,
I would,
well,
I would,
that's
I would
the answer to the
disagree with
question
that. I disagree with that because my unpopular opinion is we have too much infrastructure. We've built so much infrastructure for public charging, and I'm thinking public in particular, that the utilization rate is very low. If you look at the businesses that have invested, the vast majority are startups, scale-ups. You know, they're looking for external funding to invest in that capital. And if you look at the business model, it's sink a load of cash, get return on investment based on utilization. There's not enough vehicles on the road.
Yeah, so, but that's my point, yeah.
So we've got a supply and demand economic imbalance at the moment, whereby almost we need to hold back on building more infrastructure. So there's no virtuous circle at the moment, it's the reverse, it's, you know, destructive circle. You actually need to hold back and let the supply of vehicles hit the road, use the charging assets, otherwise they degrade,
no, we
one
need to
looks
hold
after
back
them.
on car
I'm talking cars and vans, but if you go down the other route, if you look at the way that HGVs are apparently being operated at the moment, the vast majority of them are going from a depot out and back.
Absolutely.
And if you break down how charging works, you know, and I'm going to start with the car and van, I'll come to trucks in a minute, but the vast majority of people go, it's home, it's work, or it's on the road. And on the road is seen quite often as an undesirable outcome. It's a bit like a public toilet. You need to know it's there, but you don't really want to use it. So public charging is seen as the lowest common denominator. It's the one that you want to be there, but you don't really want to go there. You then look at the HGV world, and it's, you know, depot first, very much depot first. And I mean, that's exactly what you see. And then you start thinking, ooh, what about if I'm on the road, or a backup solution? And if you look at recognised sites that will take EHGVs in the UK today, I've got 4 on my map. There's probably 5 or 6 in the whole of the UK. And then, you know, some of these are quite big sites now, and there are a lot more in the pipeline. And we've got, as I understand it, quite a lot of capital, probably my estimate, 500 million to be deployed into commercial vehicle charging. So that's coming from the likes of Aegis, Instavolt's doing more, GridServe's doing more, the ZHID program, the zero emissions demonstrators doing more. So we're going to see more go into the ground. But right this moment, car and van is not moving because a standard parking bay has been well deployed. That mid-size, and Tim and I have had an exchange around what is a vehicle size. There's this weird category in the middle between it doesn't fit in a standard parking bay, but it's not quite an EHGV, and there's stuff going on there. And then the EHGV space is last on the list, because I still think a lot of operators are going, I've planned it, you know, I've done my analysis, taken my data, I'm going to go out and back, out and back, out and back, and I don't need to use public. And I think we're going to see a delay before we get really good, A, public infrastructure, and B, utilization on the public infrastructure.
There is a good point there, Niall, about how in the car charging world, absolutely right, that we've got, you know, real challenges in terms of utilisation in that world, and how do we not get there in the HGV world? How do we make sure that we get that sort of more right size,
reliable, regular charging?
Yeah, and I think that's about maybe there is a DNO education thing there, then, rather than just accepting that there's a level of engagement that happens around what are you trying to do with that particular site, and how do we get the most out of that site, because we can't just deliver. We can't do what we've done in the car world. It just won't work. It physically won't work, and it economically won't work.
And car drivers are much more supply and demand. They'll turn up, use it when they want to, and they're hugely unloyal or very, very loyal. But the behavioural characteristics are different. When you hit commercial fleet, you can start talking about models, which is a different business model, which is, I'm going to build some infrastructure over here. Is that convenient for you? Great. Will you commit to giving me a minimum volume on that over the next 2 years? Because with that minimum volume, I now can de-risk my return on investment, and I can bring my rates down, because I know that I'm going to get a bit of a capex play on what I'm building. And if I can get 3 or 4 fleets lined up, I'll build it for you. And I think we're going to see more and more of that thinking around that approach, and that should give confidence to those who are looking at deploying capital in the market.
Well, that's a commercial vehicle model, definitely.
Commercial vehicle model,
I think you might take that a stage further. So ultimately, the buyers of logistics are buying the electricity.
Yeah.
So if you're a big manufacturer that's buying really well electricity, you might want to put charging at your warehouses for your hauliers.
Yes.
And if you can, ultimately, you want to charge at either end of a journey and not in the middle. So I think there's quite an incentive to put charging into their own facilities for their hauliers.
Phil, you take it to the next level, and you then, if you've got 7 or 8 branches, you can become a CPO yourself.
But then you're legislated.
Correct, I know, but then this is the conversation you have to correct, exactly. But what I'm saying next is the education process, to say, hey, this is what makes it viable for me, Mr. or Mrs. Government, or whatever it is, I have to say. But it's a case of, hey, this is what I want to do, and therefore it makes it viable.
But I think it's worth noting that I think people look at the CPO market and the 80p to 20p kind of delta and think, well, okay, if I get my utilisation rate, it's good. But the reality is the car market is, like you say, it's like a public toilet. You have to use it if you do, and you can pay that cost premium, and it's only the same price of a tank of fuel. No one is going to buy a commercial vehicle knowing that they're going to be operating at that kind of cost premium. And so I think the opportunities around charging are limited. It is a low margin business, the same as logistics. Like energy retailers make 1% net profit margin, 3%, 4% gross kind of thing. It is a very low margin business. There is not...
The money's made out of selling the coffee, not...
Well, put it this way, there's certainly not a huge amount of money to be made in the difference between the wholesale price of a delivered kilowatt hour, delivered being the key thing, i.e. not just generated, and what you can sell it for, and beat TCO for diesel. You cannot build a business case. So I have no sympathy for, say, Mylance building a charging station at 40p to tick the OEM Vecto box and then saying no one wants to charge. Well, no one wants to charge at 40p. It's too expensive. Like, end of. You deserve to fail for coming up with that business model, in my opinion, and you shouldn't be getting government grants to do stuff that's too expensive.
But a lot of public charging is very similar to on the motorway network. How many of you, if you're paying for your own fuel, you might work for the companies, but it's only my company, you don't want to pay a lot of money on a motorway services. What do? You just splash and dash till you can get to the Tesco's or Asda or wherever it is. I'm sure most of you at Waitrose and things like that, but I can't afford that sort of thing. But you do that, and what I call the public charge is volt and bolt, because you just literally want to do. If I'm going to a thing, I put in how much is it going to be, because obviously my wife have got electric cars, so we just go in there and I'll put 5 quid's worth, 10 quid's worth in, just enough to get me home, so I can put on my Zappy and I can get me, 8p, 9p, and that's the same as petrol and diesel, to be honest.
This then starts to open up that middle model. So we've got an expensive, probably required motorway charging type network, which is a small top up to get me home.
Yeah.
There's then the, I've got it at home, it's low cost, and then there's the shared infrastructure, which I think we started to touch on, the idea that...
Well, my depot is someone else's destination.
Correct.
Exactly. It's the destination
and you're sharing
site.
it. Exactly.
Then you need to manage all the ability around who do you allow to go there, How do you let them know where it is? How do you manage payments or the cash flow, risk if someone bumps into something they shouldn't bump into? And that's where the shared depot ecosystem is starting to emerge, because it's it's an intermediary between high cost public charging, which, as Will said, is quite expensive for what it is, and then you've got low cost. I've already paid, I've sunk my capital in my total cost of charging, I've sunk it into my own site, and there's this middle ground. How do we get people into shared bus garages, into shared, other operators who are prepared to share that infrastructure with some form of margin to cover off some of the costs, and how do we ensure that works? The interesting one is, you touched very briefly on the idea of grant-funded assets. If we're going to put government money, taxpayer money, into private infrastructure, should there be a requirement that that infrastructure is therefore shared for the benefit of all? Or is it okay that one private operator who's very good at writing grants should take all that money? And I think that becomes quite an interesting, potentially slightly contentious conversation, particularly when you look at the amount of money we've already deployed in bus garages, which we know are open during the day without buses in them. Should we be using that infrastructure differently?
What about ZHID? Bus grants? Yeah, you look at everything. You've got to look at. I think the good ideas in terms of utilisation, because your overhead's already there. After that, you've got to just make some profit on it. Oh well, no, revenue. It's not profit, but it's revenue.
And the same model applies in your blue light space. How do we get sharing between local authority infrastructure, blue lights?
And I've often talked about they need to build a depot, because they all go on standby somewhere between towns, because that's the distance and what they cover now. So actually, have they worked with the DNOs to go, where's the biggest power supply, and let's build an out-of-town new blue light hub only?
Yeah.
We've got a lot of projects running with the blue light organisations at the minute, and trying to unlock a lot of that and see where the opportunities might be. But a lot of it's around that collaboration.
And again, the fear, because it's a fear, it's about de-risking, and there's a fear that actually legislation stops some of these things happening. So how do you get in and make sure that those barriers aren't there? So if you talk to the public sector, the blue lights, they all think, actually, I'm under these type of procurement rules, I'm under public funding, and I can't do this and I can't do that, and there's this framework. So there's those little bits that we need to remove as well from all those people trying to change.
And I think this is important. Coming back to one of the initial conversations we had around the TCO and the TCC, etc., it's not, the charging is not just about, do we have to rely on public charging, but it's also around, well, what are the sort of commercial opportunities that we have to collaborate, sharing depots, or building a system where actually someone can come in, an infrastructure investor can come in, and because you're guaranteed utilization, actually the cost, the revenues that they can get and the certainty around that enables them to fund the capex of the infrastructure much more cheaply. You can kind of compare it to a CFD wind farm where you can get much better financing, right? So I think this is some of the...
But that naturally leads to, if you're going to fully de-risk that capital, you then end up in take or pay contracts.
Yeah.
And that's when you're then turning to a fleet and going, by the way, can you sign up to 10 years of taking charging at this price at this location? And if the fleet changes its operation 5 years into that contract, how does it get out of that contract? So there's a trade-off in the risks there, and it's about...
Which you have to be aware of, but clearly you get a different price point, the same as everything else, the longer you can guarantee something, but you're willing to guarantee 1 year or 2 years, and they'll give you a price for that.
Yeah, so. A break clause. I've got one with a break clause in it, just either way.
And there is a risk, but it's infinitely easier to manage at a depot where you've got a level of utilisation, it's more predictable.
And I think the bit that then becomes really interesting, if you look at everything on a TCC basis, a total cost of charging basis, you go, well, if utilisation drives the lowest price, then the charger with the highest utilisation should be the lowest cost. Now, theoretically, that is a very well-placed public charger, which theoretically says a public charger should be cheaper than a depot charger in the long term, which is a little bit of a controversial statement.
But then I can't guarantee getting on it during my downtime.
I'm just going to say that I'm waiting. That at the moment, as an operator, there's too many points. It's nice because you know when you walk in, you can go straight into it. What I don't want to do is look at it and think, oh my God, there's 2 others waiting for it. We're all going to have a scramble.
So there's a big difference between economic theory and
I
practical reality.
Yeah. I like it. I like it, mate. Oh, funny. We've all been there.
Right, 5 minutes to wrap up. Cool, so I've got next steps around government engagement. We talked about the weight specification, a bunch of other things, carrots, different parts of government. We talked about how actually some of them are talking to each other, DESNES and DFT, for example. Digital, we talked a bit about that, digital twin. I mean, there's a question for me and maybe for Matt and Jamie and Neil as well around, because I don't know this, how do we use this resource? Is that something that we want to put in there as a next step? How do we engage with the digital twin or the data?
We're building what we call a wargaming facility, which should be online by December. And we're building it so that organisations, government departments can engage with the simulations and with the models and play out scenarios and see how they would work. So
cool.
Early next year.
Let's take that as a takeaway then, not to forget that. And then in terms of the OEMs, we talked about the technology, the fact that 600 kilometers is becoming the mainstream range. I guess, I don't know if there's something we need to follow up as well in terms of the technological pathway, because I think, again, the end state might be relatively homogeneous and then we're getting all to the same point, but there are issues along the way, I suppose, in terms of how the standards, because I think you're right, market standards will come in eventually, but are there frictions being created along the way where we don't have those standards and it haven't been built in yet? And then we talked about the infrastructure. How do we help government with their communication around what might be seen as an investment and taking money from one pot to another, when in reality it might not be that way? And then I think there's something as well around, you were talking about earlier, around the seamless charging, which is something that you can create for yourself, but it then kind of requires each fleet operator to create their own